Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Joti Brar, and imperialism once again is seems to be painting itself in a corner and doing all kinds of crazy things. And Joti is going to enlighten us as to how to understand them. Let's talk. Well, Iraq, Iran, somebody, they only changed one letter with the weapons of mass destruction ploy. So now it's Iran has weapons of mass destruction. Just one quick thing. Most people forget the US and MI6 overthrew the government of Iran in 1952, 53. And Iran, in their revolution of 79, was able to come out of it and get independence and sovereignty. And they've never been forgiven. They've in the same way that Haiti has never been forgiven for throwing France out. For some reason, when you have a victory over imperialism, they never forgive. But they are back in action, figuring they're going to do it again. It doesn't seem to be working quite as well as they had thought. Something I want to throw at you, this I find very interesting, Joti, that I've been asking my guests to get their thoughts on. So now, and I'm going to show it to you. It is very important. And now we're seeing more and more of it. Look at this headline. All right, it's moving slow. Israel tells airlines not to let Israeli citizens leave, even once repatriation flight starts. So now, interestingly enough, the Israelis are saying to the settlers and people from Brooklyn and New York and the suburbs of London, nah, you can't leave. I was reading today, looking online, that a lot of Israelis who have boats and yachts and stuff, since they're not allowed to, they're like sneaking out. They're like getting all these people climbing on their boats, and they're getting the heck out any way they can because the government will not allow them to leave. Basically, they're cannon fodder. Basically, they're sitting them there saying, to me, oh, well, we can get lots of civilians killed, and then we'll say, look what the Iranians did. And I'm thinking, man, anyway, let me throw that at you. Isn't that an interesting phenomenon, Joti?
Isn't it, though? And doesn't it remind you a little bit of Down to the Last Ukrainian? This is what it means to be a proxy of imperialism. You are indeed their cannon fodder. You are there to be their weapon against your neighbors, in order that they can have, number one, they don't have to deal with the revolutionary complications that arise at home when they fight the wars directly and their people come back in body bags or just refuse to fight altogether. So they can manipulate narratives that they are somehow in support of an independent actor, a sovereign country that's just defending itself, and it's an ally, and we care about democracy and freedom, so we're just helping on the sidelines because we're nice like that. That's the narrative war is something that I think, Garland, we have to really be aware of how important it is to imperialism. Look back at all the times they've wanted to use nuclear weapons. We're being threatened with American and Israeli nukes right now, aren't we? Everybody should hide and run away and make any kind of deal that Trump demands, because otherwise he might not be able to restrain Netanyahu, and Netanyahu might use nukes. Or if the Iranians keep this up and they do serious damage to Israel, the Americans might feel that all they can do is use nukes. And the inference of all of this is back down now, because otherwise you're going to get nuked. But I think we should look back to all the times in history that the USA wanted to use nuclear weapons. They wanted to use them against the Soviet Union in 1945. They wanted to use them against Korea in 1950. This has been a pattern that they look for opportunities. They would very much like to use nuclear weapons. Obama brought this whole new strategy of making smaller nukes in the hopes that maybe they're more usable, more acceptable to people. But they need a narrative to sell it to people, or they know they can't do it. So there's two things. One is people can, enemies can hit them back. That stops them. But the other one is that the masses of the world won't buy the excuse you use for doing something so criminal and aggressive and genocidal as wiping out whole cities with one bomb. They had a narrative that justified doing it in Japan. It was a lie when they dropped the bombs on Japan, that they needed to do that it brought the war to a close. It was all nonsense. It didn't. But they had a narrative that was repeated and was accepted by masses of people around the world for quite a long time. And a lot of people still today buy that narrative, right? But the narrative is really important for imperialism, to present itself as justified, even though it is the one that's constantly threatening peace, wiping people out, and inflicting all this damage, degradation, and destruction on the globe. They need enough people to believe that it's somehow about democracy and defense and not aggression. Because, of course, after World War II, one of the principles established at Nuremberg is, what did they say? Do you remember the highest crime against humanity?
Crime of aggression, war of aggression.
Aggressive war. A war of aggression is the highest crime against humanity, universally recognized by governments across the world. So the imperialists are always waging wars of aggression, but it's very important they sell them to their own people and people abroad, as many people as possible, with their massive media means, as wars of defense. And they have to do that because if it's clear that you launched a war of aggression, people all around the world are justified in saying you're a criminal regime. And they actually can't have that, even though they are. They can't have the masses of the people and the masses of the government say to them criminal aggression. So they have to have narrative dominance, and they have to have a narrative that people are buying. And one of the things that stops people buying narratives is when reality keeps punching holes through those narratives. And sometimes the narrative is just too crazy to be bought. And actually, it's in reality, the thing that's going to stop the Americans using, and we say the Israelis, but the Israelis only will do what the Americans let them, right? Anglo-American imperialism is in charge. This is an imperialist aggression against Iran. It was totally unprovoked. But unjustified. But the thing that's going to stop the imperialists using nuclear weapons is the fact that the resistance shows up their lies. That includes the military resistance, the way they conduct themselves, the things that they do, the fact that they stand up for themselves in a principled way consistently over time, and the fact that Israel starts to fall apart. The more that Israel falls apart, the more that the people who stand behind Israel will get into panic. They'll be fighting with each other. When they fight with each other, they will start, there'll be spats between them in the press. And then we'll start to see bits of information coming out from people who know things. And all of these things help to punch holes through their narratives. The narrative cohesion starts to break down, and doubt comes out as to, who really started this and why, and what are they really after? And people will start being told what they're not being told today, which is Netanyahu, on behalf of imperialism, has been telling the world that Iran is days away from a bomb since the 1980s. Since the 1980s. So clearly it's not about some imminent danger that just like, oh my God, there's nothing we can do. We just had to go out. This is a narrative mechanism. But, if we look at the kind of the way the propaganda was being waged, we see a couple of things, don't we? One is across the Western media and political sphere, they're talking up Israel's stated reason, which is there's a nuclear threat. And they're doing that to make it look as if Israel responded to something and is not, in fact, committing a war crime. They're talking up US and Israeli military capabilities and their craziness in the hopes they can get Iran panicked and demoralized to back down before the Western military arsenals start to run out and the weaknesses of their position become too obviously exposed. We see this again and again with the way the Americans wage war. They make a lot of noise. And Trump is the perfect frontman, actually, for an American war, because he does this like, oh, we're crazy. We can wipe you out. Be careful. Be careful. We're going to, yeah, if you don't stop now, you're going to be decimated. The truth is they can't do what they say they can do, but they want to shake people's confidence enough that the mass of the people in Iran go, no, we don't want to take this on. We don't want to keep this up. They did the same thing with Russia. Do you understand what we can do to you? You better back down. You know, both of these kind of ways of waging the propaganda war are aimed at bringing about division, doubt, confusion amongst the Iranian people themselves, so they don't back the government, they don't wholeheartedly support the war, also amongst supporters of Iran around the world, whether that's governments or just masses of people who oppose imperialism and recognize the justice of Iran's side in the war, right? So, and I think another aspect, if we look at the propaganda war, we see that Gaza has just disappeared, hasn't it? I mean, literally today, I think it was today, there's been another attack on starving people lining up for aid in Khan Yunis. At least 200 people injured, many of them severely, at least 60 people dead, more people under rubble. So that count is going to rise. I've seen pictures of the hospital. Obviously, they've got no beds, no equipment. There's blood all over the floor, but people lying, waiting to be treated on the floor because there's no beds to put them in. This is ongoing. Just last week, we had media and politicians lining up to wash their hands of any connection with Netanyahu and pretend it was just him and his rabid loonies who are responsible for genocide and not us. Of course, we don't like that sort of thing. It's not very nice, is it? Because they got their eyes to a future sort of war crimes tribunal and trying to pretend it was all nothing to do with them, although they facilitated the whole thing and it couldn't have happened without them, right? But they're all lining up to pretend it's not them. That was just a few days ago, right? That's what our papers were saying. Now, Gaza disappeared. Netanyahu and his regime's criminality disappeared. The criminality of all those connected disappeared. You know, literally a week ago, 300 civil servants in Britain's Ministry of Defence, I think it's the Ministry of Defence, signed a letter to the government and to their head of their ministry saying, no, so it's the Foreign Office, to David Lammy, who's our horrific foreign secretary, and to Keir Starmer, saying, we're worried about being complicit in these awful crimes. And they were told, oh, well, then you should resign.
Exactly.
Literally just, well, if you feel that way, what you can do is resign. But obviously we're not going to do anything there. And if you stay, then that's on you. That's on you.
Look, there'll be plenty more crimes where that came from. That's what they're really saying. You think that bothers? We got lots more horrific crimes that we've got to do in the future. And if you don't have the stomach for it, this probably isn't the job for you. That's like a mafia hitman saying to the boss, you know, all of this kidnapping people, shooting them and putting them in trunks and burning them. I don't have the stomach for that anymore. They're just going to get another hitman.
Exactly. So last week, they were trying to distance themselves from Netanyahu. That's all forgotten in their classic, you know, just flip on a dime, turn the page on the script. Today, they've forgotten everything about what's happening in Palestine and all the crimes of Netanyahu. And suddenly, Israel's prime minister is being presented as a respected statesman who's acting with some kind of calm rationality in the face of unprecedented threats. And all the analysis articles are about, what do we know about Iran's nuclear program? You know, as if this is all what it's really about, right? And of course, the biggest propaganda lie is that this was all Israel's idea, and that the Zionist state is an independent actor and not a tool of imperialist control and domination. And that's never brought up at all. You know, there's discussions about, will Netanyahu succeed in persuading Donald Trump, right, to come into this war? And then we have to look at what Donald Trump says or doesn't say. And it's
if I may add something,
if
I may add something, the Bernie Sanders types of the world, right? You know, the so-called the fake left, the puppets. Bernie Sanders, you guess what he's saying? Netanyahu's doing this. We must stop Netanyahu. Netanyahu's doing crazy things. He narrows it down. It's not imperialism. It's not a system. It's not systemic. It's nothing like that. It is an individual. And Bernie will not call it a genocide. All he'll say is we must stop Netanyahu. As if all you gotta do is get Netanyahu out of the way, knowing that Netanyahu wouldn't even be in power if it wasn't for we keep him in power. But Netanyahu has to be stopped. And he doesn't say, we're the ones giving him the weapons, giving him the money, propping up everything, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't bring up at the exact same time that we were planning this devious inside deed in Iran. We were doing the exact same thing in Russia at the exact same time, using the exact same tactics. Now, Bernie doesn't see that. It's just Netanyahu is doing bad things. Anyway.
Sorry, your impression makes me laugh. It's really good.
Unacceptable. That's what Bernie always says. This is unacceptable.
Unacceptable. Yeah, right. And how does he show that it's unacceptable? He just says the word unacceptable. He has actual ability to mobilize people to make something genuinely not be accepted by the masses. Is he using that? No. He just stand there and go, oh, it's unacceptable. Oh, okay. Well, your hands are clean then, Bernie.
Right. I said it was unacceptable. There we go. Hey, I've done my part here. I can go home now and wait until the midterms and remind everybody that they have to vote for the same people. In the midterms, this is the game. It's unacceptable, blah, blah, blah. Then the next election comes. Bernie's job is to say, we got to vote for the Democrats because the Republicans are worse. That's all you're ever going to get from his ilk.
And even if the person fronting up the Democrats on that particular occasion has a personal record of deep involvement in all these war crimes, like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden both did have at the time they were up for election, right? He will stand behind them and say, oh, it's very important that we keep those awful Republicans out. Yeah. So then we have to ask ourselves, right, that why is Iran really being attacked? If all of that is just narrative construction, what's actually happening here? And when we look, we see Iran has refused to accept or come to terms with the supremacist ethno-state, Israel, right? Whose role, as we've talked about, is to maintain imperialist dominance over the region, over its people, and over its resources. And Iran has, as a part of that refusal to accept that project of imperialism, has supported the Palestinians unconditionally for the entirety of the last 40 years of Iran's existence, 45 years now, right? Its support for the Palestinian liberation struggle is part of its opposition to the Zionist project. And of course it's punished because it insists on sovereignty. It keeps taking steps towards greater sovereignty, towards economic and technological independence, towards deepening ties with other anti-imperialist states, other states which are trying to be sovereign economically, militarily, diplomatically, politically, etc. It's building ties of economic and military cooperation with other states. You know, last time I was in Venezuela, I saw something very interesting. You know that you've seen oil tankers from Iran go to Venezuela. Well, I saw something else. I saw Iranian-run supermarkets in Venezuela.
I went to the big one in Caracas. Yes, they were just opening it last time I was there. All kinds of stuff in it. Yeah. And did you see they have a big mural of I think it's they're shaking hands or something like that. They got there's several of big murals of Iran, Venezuela in Caracas.
And that's just one example. You know, if you look around the world at the most important anti-imperialist states, you will find they all have a good and deepening relationship with Iran and real meaningful cooperation aimed at helping the people of both countries so they don't endlessly suffer from the punishments that the imperialists try to put onto the populations. They try to punish whole countries for having the nerve to choose governments of independence and sovereignty. And it doesn't matter whether they're communist, socialist, capitalist, religious, atheist, like none of that matters. What matters is sovereignty and independence from imperialism, and they will not abide that. They try to starve whole populations. That is their number one tactic for bringing down a sovereign state, is to try to starve its whole people. That's the imperialists. That's these lovers of freedom and democracy. That's what they try to do. So Iran is part of a group of countries who try to help each other out so their people don't suffer starvation and terrible deprivation as a result of choosing sovereignty. Okay, and that's what they're doing, all over the world. And of course, because it's becoming an integral and important part in the anti-imperialist bloc of nations, it is seen by the lunatics who run American and British imperialism as a stepping stone in their war to bring down the biggest anti-imperialist states, which of course are Russia and China. And all of that is their plan for reasserting Anglo-American hegemony and for bringing back profitability to a system that's in a massive economic crisis, right? They don't want hegemony just like, because they're power-hungry lunatics, although they are. It's about economics fundamentally. They need hegemony to be able to keep rinsing profit, getting wealth, sucking wealth out of the labor of the entire world. To maintain the position where they're able to do that, they must have dominance. Dominance requires military and economic supremacy over everybody. And as soon as people start getting free, other people follow, and then the whole thing falls down, and the whole profit-taking, machinery that sucks the world's wealth into the pockets of a tiny number of, trillionaires stops working. Right? Capitalism's on very thin ice right now, and they are desperate to bring back profitability to a system that is really crumbling in every respect. So, and they've definitely, I think when you look at the timing of this attack on Iran, you can see two things. Number one, the desperation, because their wars are failing. They're failing in Ukraine. They're failing against the Palestinian and wider Middle Eastern resistance. They didn't destroy Hezbollah. They haven't destroyed Hamas or any other Palestinian resistance faction, despite every bit of destruction, every crime they've committed. They've got social and economic meltdown threatening them in Israel, as in Ukraine, which they keep going just by endlessly funneling resources at them. But there is a limit, to what they can do that way. So there's this kind of desperation. But I think they've also, they've been emboldened by the fall of Syria, because Syria was always seen as a stepping stone to Iran, just like Iran's seen as a stepping stone to, Russia and China. That's always been the mindset. And there's no doubt a hope that this means that because of losing a key regional ally, that leaves Iran more exposed and less able to defend itself. So, you look at the timing, you see, you talked about this misusing of negotiations to lull the Iranians into a sense that, they've known for years they're in the crosshairs and that war is probably coming. And they've been preparing for war consistently, but they also try not to accelerate when the war comes. They try to give themselves as much time as possible, because time is their friend and time is not the imperialist friend. The more time goes by, the more of a crisis the imperialists are in, the weaker Israel becomes, the stronger Iran becomes, just as with Russia. The more time goes by, the stronger the Russian hand becomes and the weaker that NATO becomes. So they have to use this strategic patience. They have to use every bit of time that's given to them to be developing their own preparedness for a war that they know is probably inescapable, but to do everything they can to prolong the period of preparation. And it makes me think very much of Operation Barbarossa, of the Soviet Nazi pact in 1939, non-aggression pact. That, when the Soviets signed that, lots of people said, oh my God, they've sold out, right? The Soviets knew damn well they were going to be attacked at some point, but they needed it to be in better conditions. And they arranged it so there were better conditions. On the one hand, they arranged it so they weren't being attacked by all the imperialists at once, there was a genuine fear that was going to happen. And they also arranged it that they had 2 more years to prepare. And they did use that time to prepare. Then when Operation Barbarossa came, they didn't know the exact day they were going to get attacked. And of course, despite the fact that, in fact, Soviets put up huge resistance, they didn't just roll in. There was huge resistance, huge sacrifices, fierce fighting. But the onslaught and the suddenness of the attack enabled, a big swathe of territory to be captured and occupied by the Nazis. And yet, all of that did not change the fact that the Soviet Union had managed to tip the balance of forces in its favor. And throughout the war, it then worked to tip them further still. And its whole people were galvanized for that. But they had been preparing and they were prepared. Now, I'm not saying Iran is the Soviet Union, but I think there's a definite parallel in terms of understanding that just because they were taken off guard doesn't mean they didn't think they would get attacked. It just means that, you know, the exact moment of being attacked, you know, the imperialists tried to use that to unsettle them, to undermine them, to shake the people, shake their confidence. They did a propaganda barrage that went along with it, saying, look, 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 we've taken out all the leaders. Look, we've taken out all the military facilities. They'll never be able to hit back. They've been decapitated. We've got all their important stuff. But within a couple of days, it became clear, didn't it, that in fact, you haven't taken out everything important. You haven't done nearly as much damage as you've shouted to the world that you've done. You know, a lot of this propaganda, as I said earlier, is just meant to demoralize people and make them give up because they psychologically feel defeated. They feel like, oh my God, you know, these people have overwhelmed us. But as I said earlier, these tactics, in fact, haven't been hugely successful. They did use the element of surprise. They caught Iran off balance, but they've also exposed themselves in the eyes of the Iranian people and in the eyes of the world. It's very hard now for any fifth columnist inside Iran, opposition, people, you know, pro-Western forces, to say to the people, oh, our government's hard line, and if they just talked nicely with the West, we'd have a good deal and we wouldn't have to have all this nonsense. How can you say that now? Who can say that now? There they were talking nicely, and what happened? Donald Trump literally went, you know, this is the thing that we quite like about Donald Trump, isn't he? He just says the quiet part out loud. Yes, we knew. Look, we tricked them. Aren't we brilliant and clever? But, you know, what they've done is reaffirm what every anti-imperialist country has been saying over the last few years, and Vladimir Putin put it beautifully, that the West and the USA in particular are agreement incapable. Right? You can't trust their words. You have to use the language of force. They can only be brought to behave on the basis of superior force, whether that's superior military force or the threat of a mass uprising that they have to take very, very seriously. Right? Those are the two forces that will make imperialists step back, start making concessions and look worried, right? And this is something that is being made clearer and clearer and clearer with every day. And that's a great help to the masses of the world that that's being put in front of them and that lesson's being taught them so clearly. And as I said, just, you know, the longer this war goes on, the more difficulty it puts the imperialists in. They're desperate for it to finish quickly, because the longer it goes on, the more it exposes the weaknesses on their side, and the more they will start to be arguing amongst themselves. The narrative control will start to break down.
What was interesting, I'll just throw this in there real quick, you know, in self-defense, one of the things that a person is taught is, you know, if somebody attacks you and starts throwing punches, the inclination is to throw your hands up and fall into a ball and try to protect yourself. And what they say is punch your way out of it. If somebody attacks you, right, immediately attack back, even if you're getting hit. Bite them, kick them, throw anything you can. They say punch your way out of it, because if a person starts attacking you, they don't expect a counterattack. Immediately a counterattack, and oftentimes a counter, it's very, very successful. At least you'll get them back off you and get them time to think. And what I was thinking is this: it was exactly what Iran did. They took a punch. You can't control that. Somebody can walk up behind you. You're walking down the street and punch you or whatever. You can never control when somebody can say, oh, look over here, which is basically what hey, look over there. Where? Hit you in the head, right? But what did they do? The minute they got themselves together, they started throwing stuff back at them, and they put Israel on their back feet. So I'm just saying it was a brilliant, really strategic move that they did. Here's something I want to throw at you that's interesting. And I think this has to do with neoliberal capitalism, whatever you want to call it, right? One of the things that we're seeing now is that the capitalist, in having a system that says everything is to make money. Iran makes missiles. Iran's government owns everything, and they make the missiles, and every missile they make costs what it makes, what cost the value of that missile. There's not, well, I just saw something. These THAAD systems, the THAAD terminal high altitude air defense systems, which aren't really working, the missiles are $12 to $18 million each. And we just saw one of these systems. There's a video all over the place where literally the missile went up, kind of sputtered out, came right back down and hit the system that fired it and blew it up. Here's my point. The inherent contradictions and problems in capitalism, right? In that, hey, we've got all of this stuff, that all of these weapons, the weapons were never made to be weapons. They were made to be a profit building product. And so you got plenty of weapons and it costs 12 million. And Trump used to say this, yes, we've got a $2 trillion military. It's the greatest military in the world. Yeah, it costs $2 trillion, but it ain't worth 90% of that is profit. So now what we're seeing is countries like Iran, countries like Russia, who are saying, countries like North Korea, who are saying we can make these things cheaper and more efficient and more effective. And even if they're not more or less effective, we can make so many more of them, so cheaper, because this is not profit driven. So we're seeing the profit driven mentality of the capitalists. The profit has caused them to be deficient in their ability to wage their aggressive wars, because you're shooting a drone at me that costs you $50,000 or $100,000 to make, and I'm or even a missile, let's say it costs $1 million. I got to fire 2 missiles. Each air defense fires 2 for 1 always, but mine costs 12 to 18 million each. And now Israel appears to be running out of missiles. In 3 days, they will be naked completely in a week. Anyway, your thoughts on all of that?
For as long as the West can keep them restocked, they will. But we know from looking at Ukraine that the supplies are finite. We know supplies have been moved from South Korea to Ukraine, from Ukraine to the Middle East. As you say, there is a point at which these arsenals run dry. That's one of the reasons why the imperialists are desperate to do shock and awe and overwhelm with the propaganda, as well as an initial weapons blitz, to make it seem as if they have overwhelming firepower superiority, when in fact they do not. But it's really interesting what you talked about, Garland, because there's kind of 2 strands to it. One is, we're seeing, even though it's on a state level, Iran is a big country and a rich country and a relatively advanced country, but it's still a developing country. It's developing fast and to a high level, but it's still a developing country. So on the world scale, when you think it's up against the entire imperialist bloc, which is in fact what it's against, it is small. This is asymmetric warfare from the point of view of Iran, because they're a small state, developing state, relatively poor, up against the riches of the entire imperialist world and everything they can throw at it militarily and economically, which they funnel through Israel. But Israel is their funnel for all those things. It's not Israel that Iran is fighting. Israel is a funnel, just like the Banderites in Ukraine are a funnel for the entirety of NATO against Russia, right? So from the Iranian perspective, it makes me think very much of the writings of Chairman Mao on guerrilla warfare. So he was the originator of a lot of brilliant military thought about asymmetric warfare and how you maximize your abilities against a superior force as a guerrilla army. But asymmetric, and I know you like to show us General Giap as well from the Vietnamese War, right? Yeah.
People's War, People's Army. Just to recommend people to buy that and read it, and it'll help you to understand.
It's a great read. So this is asymmetric warfare, actually, and that economic weakness of the imperialist model of waging war, you have highlighted very well for us, Garland. The resistance countries, all of them who are able, and they've been helping one another to become more able, which is very good. Nothing wrong with helping one another technologically. It's a human thing. Once there is technology in the world, it spreads. Just look at the entire history of humanity. That's what you will see. Right? Nobody owns technology. And, you know, it's not like cheating to get help to improve your technology. If you look at the whole history, for example, sorry, I'm going off on one now, but I'm just going to do that. For the whole history of the industrial development of Europe and America, it's a history of all developments being nicked by others as soon as somebody had done them. So, you know, the British happened to be the first to do a bunch of industrial developments. They were the first to have an industrial revolution of the modern type. Immediately, the French, the Germans, and then the Americans were sending spies to copy designs of machines and take them back home and do it. You know, most of America's development, the US, the great US of A, when it developed as a capitalist economy, most of its industrial development was from stolen technology, which America now complains about whenever anybody else gets high technology. They say, they stole it from us. And from foreign investment funds, capital. Capital came from Europe, and so did all of the secret plans for how you make these machines and all the rest of it, you know. And then America got the bit between its teeth and started developing on from there. But, you know, this is how technology spreads. I just wanted to put that out there because it's very boring. You know, you say, you know, oh, the Yemenis have developed a missile thing. They didn't do that. They stole it. It's like, well, maybe they had some help in learning how you do these things, and then they got on with it because that's what people do. So
their engineers were trained in Russia and China.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but technology spreads, and that's just a fact.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's nothing to be shocked about or outraged about. It's a reality. It's a weird capitalist thing to try to own developments, which actually, you know, even the latest little tweak that somebody does is resting on developments that go back sometimes, you know, the whole history of humanity, in fact. But you
right,
know, hundreds and thousands of years worth of accumulated technological know-how from countless numbers of human beings. Nobody invents anything out of a clear blue sky. Anyway, coming back to what we were talking about. So we're looking at asymmetric warfare, and this weakness that the resistance axis has pinpointed. On the one hand, as you said, they are producing munitions for defense. They might also sell them to other countries who want to defend themselves, but they're producing for defense primarily. And because that's the model, number one, they're not trying to make a profit out of it, as you said. So it costs the cost of labor and the cost of materials, not plus the cost of consultants and, you know, and salesmen and marketeers and profiteers and, you know, stock market plus. None of those people, the profiteers, the parasites, have to be paid. So it's much cheaper to produce. But also, as you say, it's a 2-for-1. And they have specifically been designed to reply to Western threats. So they look for how the West works when they're designing what they do, right? And as you said, it ends up with a situation where they're far more efficient, both militarily and economically. And they're also not adding anything that's not needed. They're not trying to make a sale to somebody, make it look flashy. They're not trying to tie it into some other technology that's not really needed. They're not making it more complicated than it needs to be in order to justify it having an insane price tag. They are producing for functionality.
Survival, actually.
Functionality is key, right? But to survive, they just need to work, right? And actually, too many moving parts, too many electronics, too many things interfering with one another, that's more likelihood of something breaking down. Why did people after World War II, why did every liberation fighter on the planet want an AK-47? Because the way it was engineered was about practicality. It wasn't to make a profit. It worked in every type of condition. It worked in the rain, it worked in the humid jungle, it worked in a swamp, it worked in ice, it worked in fire, you know, it worked in the desert. Didn't matter where you took it, it worked. And you could fix it yourself. You could take it apart, clean it out, put it back together, and it worked again. You know, and if you needed to solder it a bit, you know, there's all kinds of things. You could just do it. And so it's incredibly rugged, and therefore it wasn't like the planes or tanks that the West sends to its allies these days, which spend more time in the repair bay than they do in service and cost an insane amount of money. I mean, this is a recipe, as you say, for the profiteers, isn't it? This is an industry that's been designed, that's grown up around a profit motive and not around a genuine need for defense. if any of these countries were really threatened and really felt that their own defense, they all have ministries of defense and defense industries, but it's all not for real defense, is it? If it had been motivated by the need for defense because they were under attack, it wouldn't look like it looks right now. So we see the failure of the profit system. We also see the arrogance of the West after the fall of the USSR. This sense that no one could touch them, and they go, the more money they spend and the more they, put up their bases and tell everybody, we can get you, you've got nothing that can reply to us, we've got most advanced weaponry, like Donald Trump is still telling everybody. There's no one who can test them on that. They've got dominance of the skies. They can bomb people into submission, or they think they can. The reality is, actually, if you look at all the wars where they've been bombing people into submission, they actually haven't been that successful. They haven't bombed people into submission. They didn't bomb Iraq into submission. They didn't bomb Afghanistan into submission. They killed a lot of people. They generated a resistance movement. As soon as they put boots on the ground, they found that they could not hold the countries that they'd been bombing from the sky. I watched a very interesting program called what's it called? Decline and Fall. It's a comrade of mine from my party called Alex McKay, and he talks regularly with a British journalist called Kit Clarenberg, who now lives.
Yeah, Kit's great. Yeah.
Right. So he lives abroad now because the British government really hates him. And they hate him because he really focuses on the British role in today's imperialist setup and all of its dirty tricks and dirty dealings. But he lives in Serbia, and they did a 2-part special on the Yugoslav war, which is, I really recommend it. It's really worth watching. I remember that war. I'm old enough to have protested against it. And my party produced a little pamphlet that my dad wrote about it, back 15 years ago or so. But what I hadn't realized was the fact that it looked as if the narrative about that war was, we won through the bombing campaign and we just smashed everything to smithereens. Now, they did indeed inflict a huge amount of damage on civilians. But it turns out they had almost entirely missed, actually, the Yugoslav military. They managed to bring about regime change, but the Yugoslav military had not been defeated. And there was a real worry at certain points that they were going to lose the war, that if they were getting ready to send in a ground force, and there was a real worry that, actually a ground force wasn't going to have any success. And this bombing campaign didn't do what it was flagged up as having done. It just targeted lots and lots of civilians and civilian infrastructure. We know, of course, it poisoned everything because they used depleted uranium, all of that. But it wasn't militarily very successful. But Kit Clarenberg's point is that this has then been the template by which the spending of the imperialist war machine has been kind of targeted at air power and aircraft carriers, as this is how we assert our dominance, because we are totally dominant in this sphere, and as long as we have air dominance, nobody can touch us, and that's how they've blackmailed the world.
If I may throw one other thing to that just popped into my mind, it comes back to something that you said early. Their biggest fear is revolution, is internal uprising, right? Here's what they know. If a bunch of people get killed, if a bunch of our soldiers get killed, the people at home are going to be pissed. So what do we want to do? We want to have planes that can stand way back here and throw missiles at you, and we don't get anything back. We want to send our proxies. Israel, who cares how many of them get killed? Ukraine, they're cannon fodder. That's what cannon fodder is to the left. Ukrainian, Israel, Taiwanese, let them die. We set up a military where we can, they call them standoff weapons. We can stay back and throw stuff at you, and we don't lose any soldiers. Because if we start losing a bunch of people, the families back home are going to say, they may start saying this. And this is the first thing they say. What was that for? Why did we do that? Was it worth it? So their whole military concept is based, I believe, on the fear of revolution and internal uprising.
100%, Garland. That is exactly what it's based on. They are very, very, very scared of what happens. They do all this drum beating all the time, and they're constantly trying to condition the population to be ready for war and to feel that, you know, if they are mobilized, it's, you know, it's a good thing, it's a necessary thing, whatever, or at least to accept more and more war spending. Okay, but at the same time, they absolutely fear armed and angry people, right? And that's, of course, you get both when you mobilize the population for war. You don't just get people who are angry and want to know why they're dying. You get people who know how to use weapons and very often have weapons, right? That's
in this country, they do.
Right, but that's an incendiary situation. As you said, you know, this thing of standoff, commit their crimes from the sky. You know, two miles high bomber dropping bombs on wedding parties in Afghanistan. You know, like they're just dots, like they're little ants, and talking about them as if they are as well, right? Because it doesn't feel real to those people. And we remember what we heard from the pilots who found themselves under attack by Yemeni drones, that they were traumatized and having to have counseling because they didn't know that anybody could fire. They've never practiced under fire. They've never been in a genuine military danger on any of their operations. These brave pilots, you know, they got used to thinking that their job is sitting in a cockpit and dropping munitions on people who can't hit back.
The mercenaries in Ukraine, a lot of them say they went there and they were there for a couple of weeks, and the Russians were real. They went against real fighters, and they started saying, "Hey, this is not like Afghanistan. This is I'm out of here." And they were gone. They were not accustomed to fighting the Russians. They were accustomed to fighting a technologically inferior, unarmed, just beating up on unarmed people. And now they're starting to face the real armed people. Yeah,
beating civilians is what these forces generally do when they're doing army of occupation stuff, just like the Israeli occupation force does in Gaza. They don't spend their time fighting the resistance. They get booby-trapped by the resistance. But most of their fighting, most of their operations are against civilians. They bomb them from the sky, or they raid their houses, or they shoot them down when they're walking around in their lives. You know, quite similar, in fact, to what the British Army of Occupation used to do in the north of Ireland. But the other thing, just looking again back, just to round off this conversation about the state of the war machine from an economic point of view, the private profit motive aspect, something that I find kind of endlessly fascinating, really, is to see the hole they've dug themselves into when it comes to the military-industrial complex, that even though they can see there's a problem with the way they're doing things, that the profit motive is messing them up, and that deindustrialization is messing them up, when they say to themselves, oh, we need to fix this, we need to produce weapons cheaper, or we need to produce more weapons more quickly, we should be reindustrializing, what's actually happening is there's people in the Pentagon wanting to overturn the rule that says you're not supposed to outsource weapons production because it's too expensive and too difficult to try and do it at home. And can't we just get the Indians or the Koreans to do it for us, right? So, you know, their system is riven with contradictions, and the more time that goes by through these wars, which are exposing all of the weaknesses of the system, the more those contradictions are coming to light and are also becoming deeper, which is obviously, you know, a positive thing for those of us who don't want the imperialists to keep winning and drowning the world in blood.
Well, I'll say this: if they go into this thing in Iran, which right now it seems like they will, but who knows? We have no idea what the imperialists will do on a given day. They'll get that uprising here that they fear. I'm telling you, I've been in this country for a lot of years. If you want to piss Americans, you know, Americans love their vehicles. Pickup trucks, hot rods, cars, motorcycles, fast cars. America is vehicles. Americans love, they put shiny rims on their vehicles. Oh, if you'd see the people, the way they on the weekend shine vehicles. There's a guy around the corner from me. Every day before he goes to work, he takes a hand bucket and wipes his truck down every day, washes his truck, and it's shining like a new. That's America. Gas prices go through the roof. They'll tear this country to shreds. You know what I mean? It is, if you understand America, this is the important tool. And politicians are horrified of gas prices going up because they know there's one thing you can do to get thrown out of office. And if people see $9 a gallon, there'll be violence. People go insane. And so now, while I think yeah, they're probably going to attack. I think to myself, they're scared. They're scared because they know if things go bad and that there's no way, that's the end of the empire. That is their big fear. I never realized it until you said that. Their biggest fear, because all of the propaganda is to keep the people inside the empire misled, confused, blaming the wrong person. And they have to at least deliver a little bit, and or something else. Either they have to deliver something for the people in, let's say, the US or Britain, or at least fool them into thinking that they're living a little better. When Americans and the Brits start looking at the Russians and saying, hey, the Chinese and Russians are living better than us, why is that? They're in deep and serious trouble. And that's where we're getting to the point where.
Definitely, and especially when it comes to the Chinese, you know, that are bigged up as the absolute, you know, biggest of all the evils, and yet, you know, the images and videos on social media are becoming more and more common, more and more widespread, of what it is that the Chinese spend their wealth on: infrastructure, education, hospitals, scientific development, making a better life for people. Come and look at some of the amazing cities we've designed. Oh my word, you know, we've been brought up with this sense of superiority, that everybody in the world, in the rest of the world, is poor and we're rich. But as workers in the imperialist countries, we're becoming less, you know, it used to be true, but we're becoming less and less and less rich. And our ruling class is keeping us very, as you say, duped about that. They constantly fuel the supremacist ideas, the chauvinism that everywhere else is really terrible to live. And aren't you lucky you were born in Britain, this wonderful civilized place? I just wanted to come back, if I may. Is it all right, Garland, if I just talk a little bit about some of the context that's being ignored in this whole thing? Because I think before we close out, it's really important just to come back to that. Is that all right?
Sure, yeah.
You know, I said earlier, and it's really important, I think, that we remember, this is an imperialist attack. This is a war crime. The USA has launched an illegal war of aggression, the highest crime against humanity, against Iran. It has no justification for doing so. I think we'll find that very likely Britain also is playing a role in launching and managing and running that war. It's the kind of thing that Clarenberg's very good at finding out, but it will be later. We'll find out later the details of all of that, right? But very clearly you can say for sure, there's no way Israel did this unless it had instructions, and not just a green light, but instructions from the USA. The USA and its military planners will be involved at this on every single level. No way that it's not being fully coordinated and basically run, just like the Ukraine war is run by an operations room full of British and American officers. I expect the same thing is true. And the Yemen war was. I expect the same thing is true of this. And we must remember that. The aim is not the nuclear program per se, it's regime change. Right? What we said earlier, the West hates independent nations. But when we think about the nuclear question, why is it so obsessed about another country having nuclear weapons? It's got nuclear weapons. Why has no one else allowed them? It hates independent nations having nuclear weapons because that is their best way of limiting the ability of the imperialists to blackmail them and to actually use their weapons, right? And it's a reminder once again to the whole world that, as we said earlier, the imperialists are agreement incapable. They only understand one language. It's the language of force. But we have to come back to something really important. Amidst all of this debating backwards and forwards about whether or not, you know, it's like the imperialists are like, they've got a nuclear bomb, they've nearly got a nuclear bomb. And then the defenders of Iran go, no, they haven't. But what gets lost in all of that is Iran has the right to a nuclear program. Nobody can say that they don't. You know, Iran did sign the JCPOA, I can't remember what it stands for now, but the, you know, joint agreement.
Joint comprehensive plan of something or other, yeah.
Plan of agreement, I think.
Plan of action or something. But yeah, you got, yeah, basically.
It doesn't really, it's a bit of a meaningless title, but they signed a treaty to try to find a peaceful way to cohabit with the West under difficult circumstances. That's their right to do that. they also signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in the belief that the aim of that treaty was to limit the number of nuclear weapons on the planet and to limit and to bring down the likelihood of nuclear war on the planet. Right? But the truth is that the Non-Proliferation Treaty is used to disarm nations in preparation for attacking them, or to keep them too weak to even consider trying to stand up for themselves, right? So Iran had the right to sign those treaties, but it also has the right to walk away from them if it finds that they're actually not being adhered to by the other side, right? That's what Iran has done with the JCPOA. It stuck to its side of that deal for a year after the Americans walked away. Now everybody's screaming how outrageous it is that they don't stick to the terms of the last deal, but they weren't the ones who broke that deal. They, anyway, just like the Americans, had the right to say, we've changed our mind, this is not working out, right? That is their right. And when it comes to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, I think the DPRK is the best example of, a state that tried to come to terms with the West as, taking them at their word as honest brokers. It, round after round of negotiation, and saw what everybody sees in the end, that they're agreement incapable, that they're just trying to weaken you so they can destroy you. And the DPRK said, enough of this, enough, forget your treaty, we're not signing up to it. What we need is nuclear weapons so that you won't attack us. And in fact, it turned out that they were 100% right. I can't remember who it was. I always get it wrong. Was it Hillary Clinton who said, we attacked Iraq because they didn't have nukes. We attacked Libya because they didn't have nukes. We didn't attack DPRK because they do, right? So 100% right that in order to protect their people, getting a nuclear deterrent was in their best interest, right? And they have the right to do it. This ridiculous, it's a very chauvinist idea, isn't it? The West goes, no, it's up to us what you guys do. And then they put a little United Nations flag or frill around that. But, what we've seen again and again and again is that the United Nations is a tool of imperialism. You only have to look at the way the IAEA is behaving in Iran. The fact that this is the International
Atomic Energy, something,
International Atomic Energy
Agency, yes.
So they're supposed to be neutral, internationally approved inspectors to verify that treaties are really happening, right? So they go in and they're inspecting Iran endlessly. Their reports say we haven't found anything. Iran's definitely sticking to their side of the bargain. But what are they actually really doing in there? What they're really doing is intelligence gathering. And a whole load of Iranian scientists have been assassinated based on information that IAEA inspectors gave to the intelligence agencies of the West, including Israel. So who is it who still thinks that any sovereign country should abide by and allow these people, abide by the rulings of these institutions and allow them to send their people into your country to try to destroy you, right? To assassinate your scientists? Why should Iran not be allowed, number one, nuclear energy for whatever purposes it wants it for? Nuclear technology has many applications, including medical applications, which Iran is trying to develop because it wants to be a sovereign country that can take care of its own people, have its own access to technology that the West can't cut it off from. Because as soon as you're dependent on the West for anything, be it food or technology, transport, energy, they will use that to blackmail you by trying to starve your people and make their lives miserable. So any government worth its salt in the world will be looking to be sovereign on all important fronts: technology, energy, military, food, all of those. You've got to have your own sovereignty in order to be able to look after your people. That's all the Iranian government is trying to do. The West doesn't want Iran to have any nuclear technology because it doesn't want the country to free itself from imperialist domination. It doesn't want the country to be able to resist the blackmail we've been talking about. If Iran did decide to change its nuclear doctrine, we don't know that it has or it will, but if it did, that's its right. It's not a justification for anyone to launch a war against it. No justification whatsoever, not in international law, not in humanitarian law, not by any way of looking at the matter. Is that a justification for somebody to launch a war? The fact that the West endlessly reproduces Israel's justifications as if they have a basis either in law or in morality is insane. Israel's position is totally laughable. It's only taken seriously because all the Western media and politicians are parroting these talking points as if they've got some underlying basis and real value when they don't. And we just have to come back to this again and again. So what if Iran has a nuclear weapon? Have they launched it at anybody? Have they attacked anybody? Are they trying to attack anybody? Did they ever attack anybody? What are you talking about? It's Israel that endlessly attacks all its neighbors. It's the USA that endlessly wages war around the world. It's Britain that endlessly launches dirty operations and spying on everybody. Why are these people telling the world that Iran is a threat? And when are we going to learn that when they do this kind of propaganda against somebody, it always comes back to the fact that it's a country that's trying to stand up for itself, and they don't like that.
Yeah, you're right. Well, they've bitten off a bit. Well, what's interesting is that I'll just, end by saying this. You can comment if you want to or not. The desperation of imperialism is blatant in that they went after Russia and they're like, okay, we're going to get Russia. We're going to get Russia. And they had a boneheaded plan and they used a bunch of Nazis. And needless to say, it's never a good idea to go to war with Russia. You're probably going to lose that one, you're going to lose that one. So, and their brilliant plan, shall we say, went awry, and it's going bad. And they can't, and they're trying to scramble out of it. Oh, can we get a deal with the Russians so they can just hold off a while, then we can come back and fight them later? And the Russians are like, yeah, no, really, that's not going to happen. Okay, well, darn, we've got this cataclysmic, catastrophic loss on the horizon. What do you think we should do? I got an idea. Let's go set ourselves up for another catastrophic loss. To me, it shows the desperation. Like, we've got to do something. It's like somebody who's so trapped into a corner, like, we got to do something, even if it's stupid and wrong. What else are we going to do? That didn't work. Try this. It's just, you're looking at it and you're like, this is not rational, which means it's a product of desperation. And when I say to myself, what are they so desperate about? And I realize, oh, wait a minute, they're staring at economic collapse.
100%, Garland. That is what they're staring at. That is why they're desperate. They are desperate to save their system, which is failing. The problem is that this failing system is like a wounded beast. It lashes out in its fear and its anger and its desperation, and it has a lot of claws. Chairman Mao, again, he had a really nice thing. He talked about imperialism being a paper tiger, that it's kind of hollow in the middle and it's not as strong as it looks, and particularly because the masses are not on its side, right? Even its own masses don't really sympathize with it. They're not really on side for a lot of things. They might be kept quiet in various ways, but they don't really agree. They don't really have sympathy with the ruling class and its aims and its militarism. But a wounded beast is a dangerous beast. And Chairman Mao kind of said, you've got to defang it one bit at a time, systematically. Don't think you can just take it head on, because it's very big, it's very powerful. Powerful because, look at the British ruling class. It is sitting on wealth funds that it has been accumulating and sucking out of the world for 500 years. And every year that pile of wealth gets bigger with a smaller number of people sitting on top of it. And the ability to do damage around the world with that kind of money is huge. And that is why we have to come back to an understanding, that our job in the imperialist countries is a really important one. We can see, we see what our ruling class is up to. We also see the balance of forces is shifting, and that the anti-imperialist camp is coming together and growing stronger and hitting real blows back against our common enemy, which is the imperialist ruling class. But we can't sit on the side and assume that they're going to do all the work for us. Because they sit here on this massive pile of wealth, they will keep being able to make mischief, the imperialists, while we don't do anything about them. If we just leave them to sit there and hope that Russia and China and Iran and the DPRK and Venezuela and Cuba will do the job for us, it's not going to work out that way. We have to be fighting as well. We have to be building the axis of resistance where we are. We have to be stopping the war machine at our end. We have to be dispossessing these bandits of their ill-gotten gains and taking apart their stores of finance capital. So they can't keep throwing them around the world to make mischief. And when I say make mischief, I mean drown whole countries and regions in blood in order to try to maintain their ability to dominate and extract profit. You know, it's a fantastic thing to see countries around the world standing up for themselves and striking real blows at imperialism. And they really are doing that. And by doing that, they're making our job easier. They're making our job easier. They're helping us by weakening our ruling class for us. Thank you. But they can't fight it at home for us. We have to do that. That's our part of that job. You know, you talked about the imperialists' answer to losing a war is to start another war, you know, and that is true. And in doing that, they are weakening themselves and allowing opportunities for our allies, our brothers and sisters abroad, the oppressed nations, the sovereign nations, standing against imperialism to inflict blows all over the machine. And that's brilliant that that's happening, actually. But we have to inflict the fatal blow at home. We have to recognize that's our job. We've got to mobilize the army here at home. We've got to build our wing of the axis of resistance and not look at all of this like it's out of our control, because it isn't. You talked there, Garland, about the thing the imperialists really fear. It's the uprising at home, because that is the thing that actually cuts off the head of the snake, right? Move on from the tiger. That's the killing blow, is the one that's at home. That's the one they're desperate to avoid. That's the one that we've got to be working on.
Yeah. This is making me rethink. All right, some things. This is great. This has been very inspiring. Joti Brar, I know that I've seen us on Proletarian TV and on, what's the other one? Russian Accent. That's great. But tell everyone where they can find you online and find out all your good works.
Thank you, Garland. So if you can see down there, my party's website is there, thecommunists.org. We have a Telegram channel, The Communists. I have a Telegram channel personally, Joti Brar, so you can follow me if you're interested. We have, as Garland said, a YouTube channel called Proletarian TV. The best place to follow us, I think, is Telegram, because you see all of our stuff there. You'll also see links to the articles we publish daily on our website. And these are a really important way to educate yourself and get a Marxist analysis and start to develop a class conscious way of understanding what's happening in the world, which is really important if we're going to be successful in building that axis of resistance at home. On our website, we also have an education program to start your journey into Marxist science. And again, something that the working class needs to get hold of if we're going to get free is this liberation ideology, which is Marxism. So if you go to our website and click on the study program, you can start your journey there.
Thank you very much, Joti Brar. All right, everybody, don't forget, the important thing is everyone in the chat you guys are the most important part of the show. We just run off at the mouth for a little while, but what you're able to do is share this on all your social media platforms. I'm looking, there was like 500 and some people at one time, 530 people or something. That should mean that there's 530 minimum posts on social media with this show. But if you've got 2 or 3 social media accounts, Telegram, Facebook, whatever, X, you name it, please share this on all your social media platforms. That's what you can do. That is the true strength of alternative media, is that the people in the chat can have a conversation, they can learn new things. And of course, if you like a show, this one or any other show you watch on YouTube or Rumble or whatever the heck, make sure that you give the other people an opportunity to see it too. Thank you very much. Joti Brar, next week, hopefully you'll be available, and we will be back on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're out.